On the streets of Ukraine, where chaos and destruction now reign, life until recently went on as usual in any contemporary society. Since the Russian invasion in 2022, the lives of millions of inhabitants have taken a radical turn, turning ordinary citizens into improvised soldiers. The threat of losing their home and their freedom has caused an unprecedented mobilization, where the will to defend the homeland overcomes the terror and anguish of becoming cannon fodder for Russian troops. In every corner of Ukraine, the people are standing up firmly, aware that this fight goes beyond a question of survival as a free and autonomous nation. They are fighting to defend their homes and those of their children. Faced with the enormous military force of the Russians, Ukrainians are not just resisting, but are preparing to send a message to the world. When freedom is in danger, even the simplest person can become an unexpected hero. In this new video from Military Force, we will go through the story of a people who fight for survival until their last breath. Let's begin.
В окно закинули.
Сюрпризы для кацапа.
The war in Ukraine, which broke out on February 24, 2022, and has been raging for more than 2 years, has shocked the world with its brutal intensity. In a dramatic and merciless confrontation, Russia launched a full-scale invasion against civilian populations, unleashing a series of battles that razed cities and left a trail of devastation. Russian forces, with their imposing military machinery, face a fierce and determined Ukrainian resistance, ready to defend its sovereignty at all costs. Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president who has had to face the invasion from the beginning, has been recruiting civilians to fortify his country's defenses. In cities across Ukraine, billboards feature a smiling young man, armed to the teeth and with a defiant gesture. "Get ready to defend your home," proclaims the official message of the army. As the specter of encountering Russian soldiers on their doorsteps lingers, thousands of Ukrainians are volunteering to train, determined to protect their cities and become the first line of defense against any threat.
Щоб у нас була подавлена воля, щоб ми занепали духом і були зговорчиві, як кажуть. Але ні, не дочекаються.
As Russian forces continue to shell residential areas, schools and hospitals across Ukraine, civilian participation has become a key element. Little by little, military training has become a regular routine for many Ukrainians, integrated into their lifestyle as a necessary response to the defense of their nation. Young students who once argued about their final exams now gather in spontaneous war camps, learning to handle firearms and make Molotov cocktails. Parents, who until recently thought only of the welfare of their children, now prepare to protect them with their lives if necessary. Even grandmothers and grandfathers, who at other times would have told stories of peacetime, now teach their grandchildren to hunker down and survive under bombing. The start of training to join the Ukrainian army, marked by shouts of joy and photos and videos that quickly flood social media, hides a darker reality. Many of the volunteers are young people. Brilliant, motivated people, artists, programmers, designers, the intellectual elite of the nation, who left their everyday lives behind and took up arms to defend their country on the front lines.
З першого дня в батальйоні «Свобода» мені довірили навчати зброї, тактиці зброї, як вести себе під час війни, як вижити. Зараз може кожен долучитися до навчання, навіть особа з нульовим досвідом, яка взагалі не тримала зброю.
As we see, the armed forces provide basic lessons for facing enemies on the battlefield. For example, knowledge of war medicine, shooting with different weapons, training with explosives, and the use of live ammunition. The inflexible military instructors warn their new students that there is no room for fatigue or weariness. Their lives are at absolute risk and they must be prepared for what is coming.
Ну, это то, о чем надо было договариваться с самого начала.
Ми їх більше навчаємо тактики ведення бою в приміщенні, тобто відпрацювання захвату всієї будівлі, Вони займаються своїм життям, працюють на заводах, працюють вчителями, економістами, бухгалтерами. Але якщо нам знадобиться і ці люди прийдуть до нас захищати нашу країну, вони вже будуть знати, що їм робити.
Civilians seem to understand that sooner or later they will be deployed to dangerous conflict zones. And while there are lessons that can only be learned at the front, it is better to prepare and make mistakes in a controlled environment. This is how Ruslan Yarmolyuk, a journalist who decided to leave the media and take up a gun after the invasion, describes his incorporation into training.
22 роки працюю журналістом на різних телекомпаніях. Працював в різних точках гарячих. В Грузії, в Афганістані, в Узбекистані. Тобто ніколи не думав, що доведеться працювати.
Another testimony is that of Oleksandr Polovy, owner of a sports club. This man decided to offer military tactics classes for civilians after experiencing the worst 5 minutes of his life. The day of the Russian invasion was unfortunate enough to coincide with his birthday. He felt completely paralyzed, aware that he had to act but not knowing how. Over time, he understood that this war was not a sprint, but a marathon, and that everyone should prepare to face it. Polovy insists that every Ukrainian citizen should undergo training to be ready for whatever comes. Stanislav Tihanko, a 25-year-old business consultant, reveals that half of his friends are already at the front. Shortly after the invasion on February 24th, 2022, he showed up at a recruiting office but was turned away due to his lack of military training. However, far from giving up, he now regularly attends training sessions, acquires military equipment, and is processing a weapons permit, determined to prepare for any eventuality. Tihanko said that even if he is not called up immediately, he wants to be ready for the possibility of having to fight in the streets. This young man says he does not want to die from a shot to the back of the head with his hands tied behind his back. That is why he believes it is essential to have the necessary tools to face the Russian invaders.
На ощупь, все руками, в темноте, освещение слабое, должен все правильно, именно память руками должна быть, чувствовать, где пота, где защелкнуло, где на место.
Можна опять достать і поставити.
Так точно. Це гражданська людина, вона повинна руками ощутити кожну, щоб ця деталь повинна працювати тільки так.
In the middle of summer, what used to be an unusual camping trip has turned into a scene of intense military preparation in a forest outside Kyiv, near the devastated Bucha and Irpin. Civilians and soldiers mingle in front of tents set up next to freshly dug trenches. Part of the forest is still being cleared of mines hidden among the trees, so the situation on the territory remains very dangerous. A young instructor, who had lived in Poland before returning to enlist, stands in front of a table piled high with bandages and tourniquets, teaching how to evacuate wounded people from the battlefield alongside a colleague. The two-day training includes physical exercises, handling weapons and drones, with a climactic mock guerrilla battle. Teams made up of businessmen, traders, and real estate agents, armed with air pistols, fight for control of trenches abandoned by the Russian army. The program is paid for, although the money only covers the organization costs and the modest fees of the instructors. The courses fill up quickly, reflecting the growing determination of the civilian population to actively participate in any eventuality.
Запропонували з дітьми пройти, тому я вважаю, що мій син повинен розуміти, в чому справа йде військова. Приїхали і все подобається.
Сьогодні будемо проводити заняття з вогневої підготовки. Стріляти будемо на інтерактивному тирі з АК-74 оптичним лазером.
Ukraine's armed forces are sufficiently manned for now, but as fighting continues with no end in sight and casualties mount, mobilization is underway. New recruits typically receive 2 months of training, while those deemed unfit for combat are kept away from the front, officials said. In this new military era, characterized by drone strikes and missile attacks, psychological resilience has become an essential pillar. Training and preparation are never enough, but what is truly crucial is for defenders to maintain high and firm morale. The ability to withstand the stress and pressure of combat is as vital as skill in handling weapons and tactics.
Одно из самых подлых творений Советского Союза. В радиусе 30 метров не остается живым ничего, даже мыши, потому что в ней 2400 осколков.
Я работаю на заводе «Азовсталь», я технолог. Я здесь, потому что у меня молодая жена и 2 детей. Это моя страна, и я готов ее защищать. Как гранату бросить еще со школы знаю, на практике еще вообще ничего не использую.
The life they considered real is inevitably tipping its scales more and more towards war. On the outskirts of Kyiv, on a cold morning, about 60 men and women line up at the edge of a forest, ready to begin 6 hours of intensive military tactical training. The civilian clothes are left in the cars parked along the dirt road. Equipped with combat suits and armed with wooden replicas, the group is ready for action. Among them is Yegor Sobolyev, a former deputy of the Ukrainian parliament, who has stated that it is time for civil action. The man actively participates in military exercises because he believes that this will radically change the security of the population. This former parliamentarian maintains that Ukraine must be in constant preparation to safeguard its independence. As we are seeing, citizens of all kinds are rallying around the same struggle.
Отход. Ап! Отход!
The war is escalating by the day, and with the number of soldiers killed, more and more civilians are planning to join the fight. In a partially abandoned cement factory, now a training ground for urban guerrilla tactics, a group of volunteers of various ages are practicing combat strategies. Many of them have memories of when Russians and Ukrainians shared a Soviet identity before they became independent from Russia in 1991. Although in the past, the identity of Zelensky's country was not so distinctive, Putin's military aggression and propaganda have forged a more defined Ukrainian nation. In the east of the country, almost 500,000 civilians are already involved in national defense, while official figures indicate that around 1 million Ukrainians are in uniform or work in government agencies, such as health and emergency services, directly supporting the war effort. The Russian invasion has caused 1 in 10 Ukrainians to become refugees. It is common to find colleagues at work with relatives who have been wounded or killed in combat. With more than 30,000 soldiers dead, reserves of military-aged men and women are beginning to run low, despite high civilian participation. Oleksiy Vasilchenko, a 55-year-old digital marketer and part-time diving instructor who served in the Soviet Army 35 years ago, reflects on how, following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, Putin has poisoned relations between the two countries. Many Ukrainians, who maintained close personal ties with Russians after the Soviet collapse, now face stigmatization as fascists and nationalists due to Kremlin propaganda, which depicts Ukraine as a place where Russian nationals are murdered. Vasilchenko considers these accusations to be fabricated, as there are still many Russians living in Ukraine. However, he notes that as a result of Putin's aggressive tactics, many citizens are adopting Ukrainian as their primary language. These are various ways of preserving and defending what they identify as their home.
Давайте нагадаємо місію нашого батальйону. Відносно військових ми прикриваємо їм спину, їхніх тил. Відносно цивільних ми закриваємо їх цивільними людьми. Вони ззаду нас. Тут, коли ми несемо варту в місті, відповідно, вони почувають себе в безпеці.
Defending the territory has become a patriotic issue. But it is not just Ukraine that is affected by the conflict. The conflict has mobilized countries that have become key allies in this fight. Kyiv is receiving military aid from NATO, Europe, and the United States, estimated at least $200 billion. These contributions have been mobilizing for citizens like Marta Yuskiv to dare to join the fight. This doctor, who works in medical trials when she is not volunteering in military training, says that Ukrainians feel that they are fighting for something bigger. She likes to say that now it is not only Ukraine that is in danger, but the entire democratic world. She hopes that together they can stop Putin. The war affects everyone and the entire world feels it. This has translated into Ukrainian citizens practicing military tactics on their own in all the cities and towns of the country. Dmitry Kichati is married and has lived in Kyiv for a long time. He runs a thriving data processing business that has managed to stay running despite the invasion. He and his wife never left the Ukrainian capital, even in late February and early March 2022, when Moscow's armored columns were less than 10 kilometers from their home. Like most Kyivans in those days, Dmitry volunteered to help frontline troops and trained for local self-defense. When the Russian army retreated, he went back to work, but Kichati says every citizen has to be ready to fight. At a training camp in Kyiv, trainees, armed with M4 rifles and at least 3 ammunition magazines, line up in teams of 2 or 3 men under the supervision of Ukrainian and American instructors. They practice attacks and retreats along a 200-meter sandpit. They are being prepared for combat on the battlefield, where the main threat is mortar rounds and artillery shells launched by drone operators. Combat on the battlefield is brutal. Because of this, instructors prepare civilians to explore every corner of the terrain and think through every move they decide to make. Where to go, how to get there, and who can eventually provide cover. The only way to do this properly is to practice. After practice, the trainer gathers his civilian students, now soaked and dirty, to explain what happened. He highlights key points of the training, pointing out mistakes and failures to correct. He emphasizes the importance of communication, situational awareness, and reading the terrain.
Дякую, що знайшли час. Ніхто у нас не травмувався, що немаловажно. Слава Україні!
As we have seen in Ukraine as the war against Russia drags on, the line between civilian life and military service is blurring. The war readiness of Ukrainian citizens has become a fierce symbol of resistance. Men and women, young and old, are all arming themselves with a determination to defend their country at any cost. In every training session, its inhabitants demonstrate that their spirit is stronger than that of any invading army. But this fight seems to have only just begun. Thank you for following us to the end of this video. We recommend that you subscribe to our channel to receive updates on the war in Ukraine. Until the next installment.